What is going on, everyone? My name is Anson. In this video, I'm going to teach you how we can create a report system. So the way that it works is we're going to right click on the user. We're going to click on the user command that we're going to register. And then we're going to go ahead and click on the report user command. And what's going to happen is it's going to give us a modal that's going to appear on the screen. And it's going to have a text input where we can type the reason why we're reporting the user. Okay, so basically a way to give the person that's reporting the user like a little text box to describe what the situation was and why they're reporting the user. So we're going to go ahead and start everything from scratch. Okay, I'm not going to cut anything short. We're going to write everything, every piece of code from scratch. So I'm going to also put the entire code on a GitHub repository, so don't worry. First thing I'll do is I'll create a directory, and I'll just call this report user command. And I'll cd into this folder. And I'm going to go ahead and then initialize this with npm init-y. So that way we get the package.json file. I'm going to go ahead and open up Visual Studio Code. Okay, so that will open it up right over here. Okay, and let's go ahead and install the necessary packages that we need. So we'll first install Discord.js. We'll install Discord.js or at Discord.js/rest. Okay, so these are the only two dependencies that we'll need. We'll also install dev dependencies such as .env and nodemon. We're going to be doing everything in JavaScript. So npm i-d .env and nodemon. Nodemon is going to allow us to actually restart the application every single time we make changes. Next thing that we'll do is we'll create a folder, call it source, and then inside this folder we'll create the index.js file. I'm going to go ahead and create an env file. So this is where all of my environment variables are going to be. So I'm going to store only the bot token as well as the client ID for now. And I'm assuming that you already know how to get the bot into your server. I'm not going to go over that in this video, but I actually have a video on my channel that shows you how to add the bot to your server. So go ahead and consult that video. It's very, very easy to do so. Okay, I'll actually leave the link in the description so you know how to add the bot to the server, okay? But I assume that you already know how to do that already, so I'm not going to bother with that. But what I will do is I'm going to go ahead and grab my bot token and my application's ID, also known as the client ID. So let me go ahead and just get my bot token and then my client ID. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save that, and I'm just going to exit the env file because we're not going to really be working with this anymore. And I'm going to do one more thing inside the package.json file. I'm going to go ahead and set the type to module because by default it's common.js. This will allow us to use import export statements and all of the other newer ES6 features. Okay. So let's go ahead and go into scripts. We'll set up a start script. And the start script is just going to use the nodemon command, and it's just going to execute the index.js file. So we're just going to pass in the relative path to the index.js file, which is source or /source or ./source/index.js. Okay, pretty straightforward. So I should be able to just run the start command. Actually, let me rename this to start dev. So I should be able to run the start dev command by going into my console and typing in npm run start dev, and it should execute the code. And every single time I save, it's going to go ahead and restart. Nothing's obviously happening right now because we don't have any code written yet. All right, so let's go ahead and inside our index.js file, I'm going to go ahead and first import the config function from the .env package, and I'm going to go ahead and call the config function immediately before I write any other additional code, because what this will do is this will load all of the environment variables from our .env file into memory, and we can reference it by referencing process.env and then the name of the environment variable. So for example, client ID would give us the client ID value that we have over here in this file. Likewise, if I want to get the actual bot token, I would have to reference process.env.bot_token. Okay, pretty straightforward. And let's go ahead and import everything else. So we'll need to import the client class from the Discord.js package. We'll also need to import the REST class from the Discord.js REST package. Okay, and what we'll do next is we'll go ahead and create an instance of our Discord.js client class, and then we're gonna have to pass in an object, and inside that object we're going to pass in the intents property. The value of this is going to be an array, and we're just going to need to set the intents. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and import the gateway intent bits class, or this is not really a class, but it's an enum, and I can actually reference that enum and pass in the correct enums that I need. So I'm going to pass in the guilds enum, or the guilds value, so that way I make sure I get the correct events for our bot. Okay. So after this, I'm going to go ahead and create an instance of my REST client. So I'm going to instantiate the REST class, pass in an object inside the constructor, and set the version to 10. Okay. So we instantiated the REST class, and then we passed in an options in the options parameter for the constructor, and we just set the version to 10. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and just call the set token function, and we just pass in the bot token. Okay, before I do anything else, let me go ahead and just grab the bot token. So we're going to create a variable called token. Actually, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go ahead and reference process.env, and I'm actually going to go ahead and destructure the values from the process.env object, because this is really just an object, and we can destructure the bot underscore token and the client ID. Okay, so let's go ahead and pass bot underscore token. So that way, when I set the token, it will actually set the token for the REST client. And then we can go ahead and register, or not register, but log the bot in by passing in the bot token. So we call client.login, and then we're passing in the bot token. So this will actually log the bot in. Okay, so if you're confused what's going on between the REST client and the client itself, this REST class itself allows you to actually make API calls, okay, with the bot token, okay, and client.login will actually log the bot in. So this will actually connect to the Discord gateway, and this will allow you to receive events from the Discord gateway, and then you can reply to those events. Well, not reply to the events, but you can actually just perform actions based on the event that you're receiving. Okay, so I just wanted to distinguish that, so in case you're confused, you're not confused anymore. All right, so let's go ahead and just register a client, or not client, a ready event on our client, so we know when the bot is logged in. So I'm going to use string interpolation to log the username of the bot. You don't have to do this, but I just want to do it myself. Okay, and now we can go ahead and actually register our commands, our interaction, or our application commands. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and create an asynchronous function that we're going to invoke like this. So we're creating the function, and then we're going to invoke it. You could also just make this an iffy, an immediately invoked function expression, but I'm not going to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use a try-catch statement. So in case if anything happens, we can always log our errors and handle the errors accordingly. And all I'm going to do is inside the try-catch statement, the first thing that we'll want to do is we're going to want to call the rest.put method, and we're going to go ahead and pass in the route for the for registering the guild commands. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and import this routes, and this is just a constant, and this is actually just going to allow us to call the application guild commands function, which is going to just give us the actual full URL to call, because it's really what's going on is it's just a REST API, and we're just getting the actual URL so that we can invoke the correct endpoint to register the application command. That's how you actually register application commands. So we're going to go ahead and pass in routes, application guild command, or guild commands, and this is a function, and we're going to pass in the application ID, which is just the client ID, and we have that variable up here. So we're going to go ahead, pass in the client ID, and then we need the guild ID So like I said, make sure you have an actual Discord server that you can actually test your application with. So I have one right over here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the ID. And I'll just go ahead and just store this right over here. Just like that. It's not sensitive information, so don't worry about it. You can store it. You can store it inside the environment, inside an environment variable if you want to, but I'm not going to. Okay, and then we're going to need to pass in a second parameter for the REST output method, and it's just going to be an object, and it's just going to have the body property, and this is just going to be all of our application commands that we want to register. Okay, now I'm just going to go ahead and define a variable called commands, and it's just going to be an array, and I'm just going to take this commands variable, I'm just going to pass that as a value for the body. Okay, so that way, instead of just putting everything inside this this object, we can just actually separate it and put inside this variable instead. So all of the application commands that we're going to define will be configured inside this array. Okay, so that's pretty much it. So that's pretty easy. Let me also move the client.login call into the main function after we register the application commands. Okay, so that way we register the commands first, and then we'll log the bot in. Okay, so that way whenever the bot is online, we ensure that the application commands have been registered first, so that, and then it'll log the bot in. So then the bot will go online, and then we can actually use the commands. Okay, so now I know that was a lot. Well, it should be pretty straightforward with what we are doing so far, right? All we're doing inside this function is we're just registering our application commands, and it's the same example that you can find on the Discord.js docs. Okay, so now the next thing that we'll have to do is register the user command. So inside our commands array, we're going to pass in an object. We're going to give it a name. So the name of the command will be report, and then the type will be set to number 2. Okay, so and this just means it's a user command. If you were to do a message command, the type will be number 3. Okay, so let's go ahead and save, and let's actually execute our code. Let's actually run our code and make sure everything works, because we did do a lot of stuff. Okay, so our bot has logged in, and let's go ahead and go to our server, and let's make sure that the user command was registered. So if I were to right click on any user, pretend that these bots are users, right? Even myself, you can see that if I hover over apps, I now see the report user command. Let me zoom in a little bit more. Okay, apps report. Now, if I were to interact with that command, nothing's going to happen because we haven't actually wrote the code to handle it yet. Okay, and that's what we're going to do next. So far, all we've done so far was just register our user command. Okay, so now let's actually handle the interaction. So to do that, we need to listen to the InteractionCreate event. So what we do is we reference the client instance, so client, and then we call the on method, and we pass in the InteractionCreate event as a string. And the second parameter is going to be the listener. So this is just going to be the callback function that is going to be invoked whenever we receive this event. Okay, and it takes in one parameter, which is just the interaction type. Okay, and so whenever we interact with the user command, it's going to go ahead and fire the InteractionCreate event, and we're going to receive it. Okay, now we need to go ahead and check to see the type of interaction, because like I said, there's many different types of interactions. There's chat input command interactions, there are button interactions, there's drop down menu interactions, there's a whole bunch. So we need to make sure we're checking to see which one is which interaction it is. To do that, we can write an if statement. So if interaction, and there's a method called is user context menu command, and this basically just checks to see if this is a user command that is being interacted with, and it will return true if it is and false if it isn't. Okay, so if you wanted to handle other types of interactions, you would just do else if, and then you would check to see if it's, like, for example, if you want to work with message commands, you could just do the same thing. Is message context menu command would be the function to call, or the method I should say, and you would handle that logic for that specific case. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and console log the interaction, and I'll console log specifically the interaction, And then above it, I'll console log other stuff that we'll need later, such as the command name, okay, as well as the command. But let's go ahead and save, and let's open up our terminal. All right, so the bot is logged in. Let's go ahead and go onto our server. Let's right-click a user. Let's click on apps, or hover over apps and click on report. Let's look at the logs and let's see what's being logged. It's important to know what is being logged. So we logged the command name report, which is good. So we logged the command name report, which is good. We logged the interaction itself, which is good. We can see all of the data. Okay. We can see command name, command type, command guild ID. I'm curious to see what the actual command object is. And let me go ahead and test this out real quick. So let's do that. Let's go to the logs. And it just says null, so I guess we don't have to worry about this. So let's just ignore that. Okay, that's fine. So now you might have multiple user commands. You can have up to 5 user commands. So it is worthwhile to check to see what the command name is. So I'll write an if condition, a nested if condition inside our main if condition, right? So inside our main if condition, we'll check to see what the command name is. So if interaction dot command name is equal to report, and it is case sensitive, remember that, we'll go ahead and execute our logic. Okay, and this is where we're going to want to write the code to display the modal. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, it's actually pretty straightforward. All we need to do is call interaction.showModal. But it's not that simple, right? Because we first need to create the modal. So how do we create that? Well, let's go ahead and first declare a variable called modal. And we're going to need to create an instance of modal builder. Okay, so this modal builder will be imported from, so it's imported from Discord.js builders, but we actually did not install this package, but I think it's a sub package because it got merged. Yeah, so you can see that it's right over here. But I'm just going to go ahead and actually, let's just see. Let me just make sure that there's no type issues. Okay. So yeah, this will be imported from Discord.js/builders because you can see that inside the Discord.js module, there's this builders folder. Okay, which is good. And I actually think you don't even need to install the REST package itself because that is also part of Discord.js. It got merged too, I think. Okay, so I think maybe you don't even need to install Discord.js REST. But the docs do show it though, so I'm not too sure, but you can go ahead and try it out yourself. But anyways, let's go ahead and work with the modal builder. So what we need to do is let's first set the custom ID because we might have other modals that we will be working with later on. So it's always important to set the custom ID because the way that we handle modal submission is if we have multiple different modals, how do you tell which modal is being submitted? You have to check the custom ID. So we'll go ahead and have this ID called report user modal. And then we'll go ahead and set the components. Oh, let me also set the title too. So title report a user. Okay. And then we'll go ahead and set the components. So for the components, what we'll need is a text input. So the text input must also belong inside an action row. So we'll create a new instance of action row builder. Okay, and that's going to be automatically imported from builders. Okay, and then inside action row builder, inside the action row, we'll set the components for that. So we'll call action row builder dot set components. Okay, so new action row builder dot set components, and this is where we're going to pass in text input builder, the instance. And when I hit enter, that will auto import up top over here too. And this is where I can go ahead and set the custom ID. So this will be report message. I'll call it that. You can call it whatever you want. Let's set the label to report message. We will set the style, and I'm going to import the text input style. So this is an enum that comes from the Discord.js package. So that's going to also be automatically imported up top there too. And I'll set this to be a paragraph. Okay, you can see that text input style was imported up there. And I think we can also set other stuff too, such as required. Let's set that as well. And we can also set the min length. So set min length. Let's do for now we'll just do I guess this is the minimum length of text. So let's just do 10 for now and set max length. Let's do 500. And I think that's pretty much it. So yeah, so we have the action role builder, and inside the action role builder we're going to have a text input builder, and the action role builder is going to be inside the modal itself. So that should be fine. Let's go ahead and actually set the modal now. So we'll go ahead and call interaction. We'll reference the interaction object, and we'll call the show modal function. And then we'll go ahead and pass in the modal. And let's save, and let's just make sure that everything works. So we'll have to wait for our bot to log in. All right, so our bot is on. Let's go into our Discord server. Let's go ahead and right-click a user. Let's click report, and you can see that now the actual modal is appearing. Okay, and I can go ahead. I'm not sure why. Why does it say report message? Let me actually fix this. I think the label is what it was. I think yeah, I think I'm gonna go ahead and set this to. I might change to report message instead. I think that's how the field is displayed. Okay, there we go. So let's try this again. Okay, there we go, perfect. And you can see that there is the max number of characters. Okay, and it says must be 10 characters or more in length. And you can obviously change this yourself. Okay, now here's the next thing that we need to obviously figure out, right? If I were to go ahead and submit this form or submit this modal, how do we actually ensure how do we actually handle the modal submission itself, right? And if you watch my YouTube videos, right, if you watch my previous videos on how to handle modal submission, you'll know that it's a little bit different in how we handle interactions, right? There is no method on the interaction object that checks to see if the interaction is a modal submission, but you can actually check the type of the interaction. So what that means is, for example, I'm going to write an else if, and I'll do interaction dot type is equal to interaction type dot modal submit. Okay, so there's different types of interactions, right? Modal submit is one of them. Now, yes, this was how we actually handled a modal submission. But here's the problem, though, right? How do we know who the user is, right? Because if we were to actually handle the modal submission this way, right, we wouldn't actually know who the target user, right, who the user that we are executing the command on is, because this is going to be its own separate scope. It's going to be in its own scope, and we won't know who the user is, right? Even if we were to, let me log the interaction, and you can see that we actually don't even have a target property for the user. So there's no way that we can actually get the information about the user at all, and I'll show you, right? I'm going to go ahead and save this right now. And let me also just write a console log, modal submit, and you'll see that there is no property that will give you the target user, right? The member property is actually for the member that had submitted the modal, but that's not who we want. We don't want the member. Okay, so let's go ahead and let me show you exactly what happens. So I'm going to right click Hello World Bot. I'm going to hover over apps, click on report, and let's just say user was spamming. Let's hit submit. Let's go over to our console and let's go ahead and look at what happens. So you can see that right over here, that if we look at the interaction itself, the user property is not the correct one, right? This is the person that actually submitted the modal, not the person that we are executing the command on. Okay. Likewise, the member object is the same thing too. Okay. You can see that over here. This is us, not the user that we are executing the member on. So how do we actually handle this situation, right? Because this might be a little bit difficult. Like, how do we actually handle this specific information? How do we ensure that we get the actual user, the target user? So this is where we're going to need to use the await modal submit method. So let me actually go ahead and delete this. Okay. And well, actually, you know what? I'm not going to delete this. I'm going to go ahead and just leave that for now. But what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and use the interaction dot await modal submit method. And this is basically just going to wait for the user to submit the modal, and then it'll proceed with the rest. So for example, we're going to pass in some options, and it's going to take in a filter, and this is just going to be a callback function. And then the second property that we need is the time. So this is how long you'll give the user to submit the modal, and after a certain amount of time has passed, it's just going to throw an error because it did not receive the modal submission. For the time, I will just set this to, I'll do 10 seconds, so that's 10,000 milliseconds. Okay. Now for the filter, this one is just going to be a little bit tricky because you want to make sure that you ensure that the modal is being submitted. Okay, so in our case, what I'll just do for testing purposes is I'll just go ahead and just console log inside here interaction dot let's see, interaction dot let me do this, await modal submit. Okay, and really inside the filter, oh yeah, I forgot to mention that this also takes in the interaction argument, so I'll just label this as I. And this is actually the modal submit interaction type. Okay, it's actually a different data type. And if you needed to filter out the submission, right? Let's say, for example, if there's something in the content that the user had wrote that you don't like, you would just return false, right? And if you want a better example of how the filter function could look like, let me just show you the docs real quick. So right over here, you can see that we have the interaction.await modal submit, and they have their own interaction, right? And it just depends on what kind of logic you're trying to implement. Over here, their filter is ensuring that the custom ID of the modal is equal to modal, and we could do that, right? So we could also just write that check too. But in our case, it would always pass anyway, so it's not really that big of a deal. So that's why what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and just return true. So this will just go ahead and allow us to get the first submission. Okay, and I also need to use async await, so I'm going to add the async keyword in front of our callback function. And I think show modal returns a promise. Yep, so we'll do await, and we'll do await. And then once the, modal is done submitting, we can go ahead and continue with the rest of our logic. So what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and try this out. So after the modal has submitted, we can go ahead and actually reply to the user. Okay, but what I'll do is, let me just test this out real quick. So let's go over to our server. Let's report this user, submit, and nothing has happened so far. But you can see that if we look in the logs, you can see that it says modal submit. So that's coming from the callback function. And then we're logging the modal submit interaction. Okay. And then you can see that it says await modal submit right over here. So it actually, okay, so what happened here was it actually fired the, it actually logged modal submit right over here. And then it happened right over here too. So I'm actually just going to remove this entirely because we only care about this part over here. Okay, so now what's next is we're going to wait for the modal to submit. Okay, once it's done, we will reply to the user. Okay, and I'll show you how to actually get the data so that you can like do stuff like save it to a database, you know, create like a record, and then so that way later on you can show it to the user. Or if you like, again, it depends on what kind of implementation you're trying to create. But this await modal submit method will return a modal submit interaction. So we'll just call this modal submit interaction. Okay, and what we'll do is we'll do modal submit interaction dot reply, and then what we'll do here is we'll just say content, and I'll just say thank you for reporting, and I want to go ahead and mention the user that was reported. Okay, and so what we're going to do is we're going to reference interaction.target member, and I think you can also do that from modal submit interaction. I think modal submit interaction also has target member. Actually, it doesn't, so we can't even use that. But it's okay though, because since we're using await modal submit, we're still in the scope of our code, so we can actually reference the original interaction object to get the target member. And this is going to be helpful if we need to use this data to save it to a database, or call another API, or do whatever we want. Okay. Now it's going to say, thank you for reporting target member. And I can also just list the reason too if I want to, right? I think to do that, we can just do modal some interaction. And there should be a property called fields. Yep. And I can do get text input value. And I can just pass in the custom ID. And the custom ID was report message. Okay. And I'm also going to set the message to ephemeral. And what that means is that only the person who executed the command can see it. And obviously that's what you want, right? Because you don't want other people to know that you reported a user. You want reports to be anonymous, right? That's typically how reports should work anyways. So let's go over to our console. Let's wait for our bot to restart, and then we'll go and test this out. All right, so let's go to our Discord server now. All right, let's try this out. So let's go ahead and right-click Anson bot. Let's click apps. Let's click on report. And let's just say user was spamming, submit. And now you can see it says, thank you for reporting Anson, reason user was spamming. And then you can see that there's this notice over here. Only you can see this. Okay. So again, like I said, right now we don't have a database connected to our application, so we can't really do anything with that. But if you wanted to interact with the database and save this data to the database, right, you can go and do so, because now you know who the target user was, which was the person that we reported. Okay. And you have the reason, and then you know who the person who executed the command was, right? If you wanted to get other information too, you can go ahead. So let's say, for example, if you wanted to get the user who initiated the command, you would get that from console log.interaction.member. Okay, so member is the person who executed the command. Target member is the person who is being targeted, the person that is having the command executed on, right? And let me actually do this. Let me do target. Let me do username, and let's do console log. Well, let me not username. Let me do tag, and then I'll do interaction user or target user tag, just so you see the difference. Okay, because I don't want you to be confused with what's going on. Okay, and I want you to understand the reason why we're using await modal submit is because we might want to process the information. We might want to process the data in our database or with another API later on, right? And if we were to handle the modal submission by checking to see if the interaction type was a modal submit, right? Because that interaction would be received with the InteractionCreate, because it's still going to fire that InteractionCreate event, right? And when that InteractionCreate event is fired, the interaction object itself is not going to give us the target user, right? And we need the target user. So that's the reason why we're using await modal submit. I hope that this is not confusing, but if it is, feel free to leave a comment down below or just join my Discord server and I'll clarify any questions that you have. But let's go ahead and test this out. So let's report hello world bot. Hi. Submit. And let's look at the logs. You can see that it logs my account username and it logs the person that was targeted, which is hello world bot. So hopefully that distinguishes the differences. Now, if you can think of a better way to handle the modal submission, I would be more than happy to hear your ideas, but that's the best way that I could think of handling it. But nonetheless, it works great. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So first off, thank you so much for watching the video. I hope you all enjoyed it. Like I said, all the code will be in a GitHub repository, so you can go ahead and clone it and play around with it and do whatever you want with it. If you need any additional help, leave a comment down below. You can also join my Discord server. The link is in the description. And that's pretty much it. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next episode. Peace out.